Okay, thank you, Jason. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Allison Bauer-Wilner, and I'm the Marketing Director for Strategic Accounts at Mölnlycke Healthcare. I'm also the Volunteer Chair of Professional Education for MedTech Women at SEMDA, as well as a member of its advisory board. Before we get started, I want to just remind you of a few SEMDA activities that are underway. I want to make sure everyone's aware, next week is the MedTech Women at SEMDA conference in Memphis. That is on November the 7th, and it's being held at Memphis Bioworks. I hope that many of you can join. We also wanted to let you know that Allison Lohr's webinar from last month, September's webinar, is now online at semda.net/webinars. And I also want to remind you that next month in December, we have a webinar with Dr. Hansa Bhargava, Senior Medical Director of WebMD and Medscape. And she's going to talk to us about making the most of your online readers. Now, for today's webinar, if you have a question and you have a microphone, let us know in the chat window and we'll open up your microphone. Otherwise, just type them in and we'll get to as many as we can. All right, so with that, Jason, unless we have any reason to pause, we're going to go ahead and get started. Are we good?
We are good.
Great. Okay, thanks. Our presenter today will inspire us to embrace who we truly are and channel that knowledge toward our own professional success. In this month's edition of our webinar series, Mariss Farrar, VP of U.S. Commercial Human Resources and Administrative Services at Mölnlycke Healthcare, will present a webinar on the topic of using your whole self to your professional advantage. The MedTech Women at SEMDA group is a diverse one. Our common thread is our mutual goal to grow professionally and to play a part in nurturing and growing the medtech community in the Southeast. Our membership includes students and executives at startups and in big companies and at law firms, agencies, and consulting firms supporting our medtech industry. We each bring unique skills, experiences, and personality differences to our workplaces every day. To do our best work and to shape medtech in the Southeast, we need to leverage our strengths. Embracing the unique traits and skills that we each have is critical to our professional success. Our whole self is both an input and an output of our professional journey. Acknowledging both our strengths and weaknesses while embracing who we are, where we've been, and where we want to go is critical for our continued success. During today's webinar, you'll hear about ways to enhance and embrace your own unique whole self and use it to maximize your professional progress. Marissa's career includes progressive leadership roles, and she's contributed in roles with increasing responsibility at large healthcare and consumer companies such as Merck and Kimberly-Clark. In my own role at Mölnlycke Healthcare, a $1.2 billion wound care and surgical company with its headquarters in Atlanta, I've been lucky enough to witness the results of Marissa's great work firsthand. Her leadership has had a tremendous impact on Mölnlycke's corporate culture. That's what inspired me to invite her to present in our webinar series today. As you'll hear in her presentation, Marissa operates every day by bringing her whole self to the table and inspires others to do the same. I'm confident you'll get a lot of value from today's presentation. Grab your lunch and enjoy today's webinar. Thank you.
Hello, MedTech Women at SEMDA. My name is Mariss Farrar, and I am joining you as the Vice President of Human Resources for the U.S. Commercial Organization at Mölnlycke Healthcare, and I'm based here in Norcross, just outside of Atlanta. When Allison asked me about joining this group to talk about using your whole self to your professional advantage, I couldn't think of a topic that is more near and dear to of my role in human resources, but because it's something that has been a personal journey of mine. I can remember early on in my career, I went through a HR leadership development program at Merck & Company within the pharma world, and that was right after I finished my Master's of HR Management at Rutgers University. And I can just recall trying to figure out the whole world of corporate America and how I should be presenting myself. I was based in the corporate headquarters in White House Station, and I could see around me a lot of executives, dressed to the nines, very formal corporate atmosphere, and was trying to understand in my early 20s, how do I find my place? How do I show up as a competent individual amongst all of what was going on around me? And I struggled. I struggled really and truly for quite some time in my career, trying to find my place as a woman professional, but also the second lens that I wear, which is the makeup of who I am, is the brownness, my ethnicity. So being a Black woman in a corporate environment is also something that is different. And I say that because oftentimes when you are trying to find your way, you pick and choose people who are around you to maybe emulate, who you admire, whose capabilities, whose qualities you see something positive in. And just along my journey, I would try to find individuals who I could emulate. And more often than not, very much professional women. I can name them: Silvana, Rhonda, Robin, over time, who have made a great impact, but not very many African American women that I could look up to. So it has been a journey of me trying to, I would say, test and learn different things and really just become more accepting of who I am and what I bring to the table. So I'm going to share a little bit more about this journey, and hopefully you find it helpful for yourselves. All right, I think the key here is starting with self-awareness. And this is a recent article that was published in Forbes this month in October. And it's about agile leadership. And the author really speaks about the world, the VUCA world that's going on for all industries, and needing to be nimble and stay ahead of the constant change. And VUCA is the vulnerability that exists, the uncertainty, the amount of complexity, as well as ambiguity that exists for all companies, really, in the modern society. And what she discovers in this piece is really that those individuals who are able to practice more inflection, introspection, and discover what it is that they bring to the table as strengths, but also the things that they need to work on. Those leaders are the ones who ultimately are more agile and can respond nimbly to change. This is the type of self-awareness that is really sparked by asking questions, asking for feedback. So imagine me in my early 20s at Merck and trying to figure out, what do I wear to work? How do I talk when I'm presenting, during meetings? Do I raise my hand as a young upstart, or do I stay silent? It can be made that much more simple by simply asking questions, being almost like an anthropologist, discovering what others believe, what others see, what others would suggest you do differently. This is a process of continuous feedback, and again, that introspective thinking, that quiet thinking time to be able to process what you hear. And the author says, those leaders who spend a great deal of time asking questions, being an active listener, and applying the learnings and the insights where it makes sense for them, not only in how they show up as leaders, but also in how they conduct business, are the ones who are successful. So self-awareness is the first step. And I think when you become self-aware, you wind up getting a whole lot of information. So when you ask for feedback, boy, does the feedback come. And you have to be prepared for it. And I think that being prepared for feedback is made easier when you really are sure of and confident of yourself. And I can admit that that is something that took me some years to develop. Again, looking all around me, trying to find role models or individuals whom I could emulate. I can think of one individual, Patrice, early on as a senior leader, who was someone who I went to and asked for feedback, and someone I could look to role model and emulate as well. But I had to be, at some point, in dealing with all of this information, okay with who was looking back at me when I looked in the mirror. And that was being okay with the fact that I was a emerging talent, very blessed to have been accelerated early on in my career. That was being okay with the fact that I, might not have been the same age cohort as, half the people in the room, or of the same gender, half the people in the room, let alone of the same shade. And so there were things that I had to get okay with, whether it was the way that I spoke, or the fact that, when people are talking about their own experiences, I have a different way of different experiences. I have different music that I listen to. I have different things that I do on the weekend. And so those differences are okay. I think being, first of all, accepting that you are different, and being okay with those differences, and then using them to your advantage. I think that now I've come to a place where I'm contributing in a meeting because I know that the perspective that I bring, nobody else in the room can bring it. And I think that when you are okay with the things that make you unlike other people, at some point something clicks for you, and you become more geared in terms of how can you help inform and educate other people about your differences and leverage them to your advantage and really move the conversation forward. The other thing is around accepting and addressing your gaps. So this goes back to the first slide and the Forbes article about self-awareness. You cannot begin to know what you need to work on to move forward unless you have the feedback. And you will need to pick and choose the areas where you feel like there might be fatal flaws. If it's something where, you have a tendency not to be collaborative, you are a type A and you get things done and you want to get them done quickly, and, you've got an idea and you just want to execute, well, if you're getting feedback that you have to be more collaborative, that's typically something that you want to give some time and attention to. But not everything, right? I mean, you'll get feedback and people will nitpick about, oh, you talk too fast, you need to slow it down. You can modulate those things, and take them. It might be a cultural difference that you have, that you just naturally speak fast or you speak with your hands. And, the key is not to lose yourself in your quest to obtain feedback and apply it and become more self-aware. The key is to try as much as possible to maintain that thing that is unique and makes you unique. I think when you're accepting who's in the mirror, it's important for you to look the part as well. When I look in the mirror and I'm not fly that day, I don't, hair is not laying down exactly how I want it to lay down, I feel some kind of way about that. So I think when you are looking in the mirror, give it your best shot, make sure that you are standing tall, wearing heels when you present, put on a jacket. It's not about looking, stuffy or stodgy in your appearance, but get into that groove. You know how you look when you walk out the house and you feel like $1 million. when you're looking in the mirror, get yourself to the point where you feel that confidence, that inner glow, and you can appreciate the person looking back at you and give her a high five at the same time. The flyness factor, I think, goes hand in hand with that. This is all in the same vein of knowing what makes you unique and flaunting it. If it's something that is, something that you bring to the conversation because of your unique experiences, tell your story. And don't be apologetic for things that are just natural and innate to you. I get a lot of questions about styles and culture, and how do you adapt to corporate America? Well, corporate America needs to adapt to cross cultures and people that come in all shades and sizes, and so there's a piece of this talk that I want to just really impart about being unapologetic. If you're a type A individual and you have the tendency to internalize things, maybe when you don't get the right answer or you make a misstep, that internalization, you have to pump the brakes on at a certain point before it becomes counterproductive to you. And I think when you remember the flyness factor, you remember all that which is good about yourself and what you bring to the table. And it gives you that inner boost of confidence so that you can be, you know what? I made a mistake. I didn't mean to give you those numbers. But you know what? Give me a second. Let me get back to you. You know what? I got the number right here. Here's your number. Just remember the flyness factor. And on certain things, you make a misstep, you fall down, you get back up, and don't become that individual that just keeps pining over it. Be unapologetic about some things at a certain point in your life. So using your whole self to your professional advantage starts with an introspective look, becoming self-aware, asking for feedback. We also talked about just making sure you're accepting of the person that you see in the mirror. And that's bringing all of your strengths, your weaknesses, your flyness, and being unapologetic about some things. I want to transition to give you a couple more tips and tools that you can use and just discovering your brand, because you, I'm sure, have an idea of how you hope to show up in front of others, but it's always good to test that with reality and what others are experiencing of your brand. So many of you are familiar with 360 assessments. Most organizations offer these in line with, trying to gauge your strengths against certain leadership behaviors or high performance behaviors. Some of them are anonymous and others are quite transparent. Here again, you'll get a lot of feedback. The key is to look at the themes and really get it down to the top, 1 to 3 things that you want to explore further and then ultimately work on. Another great tool is something that has emerged out of a body of work by the Gallup organization, and Tom Rath has done a number of publications on finding your strengths and using your strengths to your advantage. Oftentimes we talk about, working on your gaps, and this is all about knowing what you're great at and really taking that to the next level. And making your strengths even stronger in terms of your impact to the organization. I tend to be a little bit more balanced in view, and I know from an HR standpoint, we look at both things when we think about talent management and how we build a strong succession pipeline. It's important to know not only the strengths, but the areas as you continue to grow your career and move up in the organization, where you need to maybe fill out your experiences or get some additional coaching. But I mentioned StrengthsFinder because it has been a tested body of work, and certainly gives you a different flavor and assessment of where you are just naturally, innately good at certain things. The next thing is an activity that really doesn't require a tool or particular investment other than your time. And that is a quick feedback request. And this is something that I've done, just to test the brand. You ask your colleagues if they can describe you. And these are individuals who you work with or who know your work very well, or your family, end of the two, to describe you in one or two adjectives. What would they say describes your brand, or how you show up based upon their experiences with you? And I think it's important whenever we're asking for feedback that we give permission to those we're seeking feedback from to be balanced in their perspective, to give, both appreciative and a constructive flavor of feedback. When you're asking for those adjectives, it's important that you write down your own list so that you can compare the two. So once you're getting the feedback in, if people are saying that you are collaborative and very insightful, a problem solver, and you thought that you were far more inspirational, and you just were convinced that people were going to come back and say that you are this individual who great storyteller, imparts lots of wisdom, and inspire people to jump through hoops to get to the next side of things. If that's the case, then there might be a little bit of a gap. Not a bad one, but maybe just take a step back in terms of what you really believe your brand is and what you want it to be. And then ask, as you're getting the adjectives in, test it a little bit, so help me understand, the experiences that I have given you or the behaviors that I have displayed that have given you that impression. And again, I often say it's like being an anthropologist and becoming curious and just asking the questions about human behavior and how you're engaging. The next thing I want to just talk about is, as you are on your own journey, is paying it all forward. I think it's important for us to die to self a little bit and to become really vulnerable with our own journeys. I started in the beginning talking about how I just looked outwardly so much when I first started my career because I did not have an example, not through my parents, neither of whom were ever within a corporate environment or a corporate world. I did not have other family members or friends really to be able to talk to about what is it like to be a professional woman in a corporate environment. And so I did a lot of looking to others, and others took their time to coach and give me feedback. But it wasn't all on them. It was on me as well to, as I said, look in the mirror and think about the things that maybe at some point I was feeling like, oh, I'm just so different. Nobody understands me. I don't know how I can engage. Getting to the point where I looked the person in the mirror and became more comfortable with who I saw looking back at me. Comfortable in being a female in business, comfortable with being an African-American female in business. It's when you marry the feedback and all that you're receiving externally with this inner strength, this inner realization of who you are, when those two things come together, magic can happen. And I just testify before you to say, if you have been through a similar journey, if it has been a struggle of trying to figure out your worth or what your strengths are, if other people have given you feedback and you've had to try to figure out how do you make the two connect, please tell your story. I think my model of managing my team has always been to be as transparent as possible about my successes and my failures, and hopes that they see something that they can learn from and do better and maybe not make the same missteps. And I think we, as women leaders, have a responsibility to be engaging in this very authentic and transparent conversation for the sake of bringing forward those who are in the generations behind us. And with that, Jason and Allison, I will open it up for questions.
All right, great. Marissa, thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation. And I just love when we talk about women who struggle, they've been through a hard time. I really appreciate when we can teach them and encourage them to be who they are and see that as failure as actually something that you've learned and you can bring to the table. We see all these people who have done startups who have had 5, 10 failed startups, and really the value to what they bring to the next startup is what they learned from that startup. So I love that acknowledgement that, success is based on learning from your failures. You talked a little bit about when we go through a struggle like that. Can you just help us with any tactics that you're aware of or suggestions you have about how to kind of pull yourself up from your bootstraps and remind yourself that that is in fact something that is to be valued?
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes, Allison, is a Nelson Mandela quote. My team would be familiar with it. It goes a little something like, judge me not by my successes, but on the number of times I fell down and got back up. And to me, it just speaks to the point that every day provides a new chance for you to try again and get it right.
Right.
I think the learning from times when you might make a misstep or get things wrong. I think what comes from that, it only comes in reflection. You're really trying to inside of you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. When you're really trying to explore, the actions that you took that led to the outcome, and ultimately, seeking feedback to understand what could be done differently the next time. And you're processing the same thing. If I think about, some of sometimes this translates even into job security. As you think about organizations that go through layoffs and looking at the rating ranking process of who gets to remain in the organization and who ultimately will be let go from the organization. I know that process sometimes can have a really personal hit to your ego and how you feel about yourself and how you can start again. In that instance, I think it's really important for people to first realize that it's not personal. So every organization goes through this sort of process, and it tends to be more about profitability and less about you as an individual. And I've got a couple of tips if you have gone through those things in the past or are experiencing or working through that, sort of step back and how do you work through and really remember your value and move forward. It's to really work on your resilience. I keep a folder I have encouraged others to keep a folder of the accolades that they get from their customers, from their managers, because those are things that you need on a rainy day to remind you of your greatness, the things that you have had an impact on. I think as you're going through the process of looking for a new beginning and new jobs, I think that it's important for you, the flyness factor comes in where you already assume and operate like you've got 2 or 3 jobs in the hopper. So you're talking to a recruiter and you're almost acting as if like, yep, I'm going to get back to you because I'm going to have to get back to you because I've got these 2 other companies that are on hold, and I just want to make sure if the interview time that you're talking to me about really works, because I'm having to balance it against these others. Just always think about projecting your worth and your value, and not taking it into a point of where you are, like I said, pining over it or obsessing about it. You got to move forward. Every day provides a new chance for that.
Yeah, that's great, Marissa. Yes, accepting and loving who we are, and making sure that we understand that our whole self is part of what we're bringing to the table every single day when we work. That's fantastic. We do have a few questions on the webinar. I'm going to go ahead and share with you. One of them came from Katie King, and Katie is asking, when choosing a mentorship, is it smart to pick someone with similar qualities that you see in yourself, or someone that you wish to emulate?
So mentorship, I think, always needs to start with an objective. So the answer is it depends. I think it is up to the mentee to really determine what they are looking to get out of that mentoring relationship. And if it's something that you want to strengthen your business acumen or a functional skill set, I think you can pick anybody. It doesn't have to be a particular person who is exactly like you. It should be a person who's good at those things you want to develop in. That could be a man, that could be a woman, different types of background. The focus should really be on who is the best person who does that thing that you can learn from. However, I would say if your objective is more to figure out how to navigate socially in an organization, yes, I believe that you can learn these things. Some of the best pieces of feedback on how to navigate politics or avoid them have come from a lot of my male mentors, and how to kind of speak up and present more confidently. But I would say there is a special thing, and it's something that I have looked for, that comes more in terms of if you have an objective to learn how to be more personally confident, or if you have very specific experiences that you want to bounce off somebody that you believe nobody else can really understand unless they've been through it, then I would say you want to try to look for someone as a mentor who has actually gone through those things. I know that, when I am asking for feedback and I'm sitting across from another woman, she's going to engage with me and say, girl, listen up. You got to get this in order and that in order. It's a different dynamic that flows. And if I'm sitting across from another African-American female, that's even a different, another layer that's, it's just different. There's shared experiences and norms, and a language that evolves that I think you can only get from someone who has been there, done that, kind of walked the same path. So it really goes back, Heidi, to the types of objectives, what you're seeking out of the relationship that would define the type of person that you approach from the mentoring standpoint.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Jason, I think there was another question. I can't see all the questions, and so I was wondering if you could see any additional questions.
Yeah, so one, Valerie Hayes, and I'll just read it. I concur with your experience and processes to process and understand, um, to accept and improve our brand. I found that it's not just men versus women in the glass ceiling, but women leaders can be more difficult to interact with because they are sometimes threatened by upcoming leaders. This has been hard in my career sometimes. I think sometimes it's healthier to report to men. They don't feel as threatened in the same way. And just wanted to get a comment.
I I think it's an interesting observation. I can remember having a conversation with at least one member of my own team when I first started at Molica who made the same statement. You know, that their experience of always having reported to a man and like, oh, I guess we'll see how this will go, and reporting now to me as a woman because of all of the, I believe some of the preconceived notions that women can be catty, or they can be quote unquote bossy. I listened to one of my team members sent last night a lean in webcast that had Sheryl Sandberg featured, and she made one of the observations that somehow on the playground only young girls get the label of being a bossy little girl. He asked the question of the audience, how often do you hear that a man is referenced as a bossy boy? So I think, with that observation, there are probably some experiences that justify that perception, but I also think that we allow some preconceived notions or stereotypes to feed into that sort of mindset. I think that the feeling of being threatened can cross genders, absolutely. I think that anytime you have an individual who is unsure of him or herself, therein lies the opportunity for feeling of insecurity or feeling of being threatened if somebody else is coming up and potentially knows more than them or is more confident than they are. Again, that goes across genders in my mind and from what I see. I think it's important for us as leaders to get a mindset of we should just want to leave the best pipeline of talent after us, to hone and shape and mold and hire people who are smarter than we are. All day long, I would have a team that is smarter than me and I want them to be smarter than me. I want for them to be able to stand on their own, and be able to answer questions with confidence and with subject matter expertise. I think if we change the mindset as leaders, whether we're men or women, to wanting to have a better generation to succeed of, it kind of levels all of that out, and hopefully the conversation is less about gender and more about great talent.
Great answer. Jason, I'm wondering, as a male, if you have some feedback as well on that topic.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I'll say that the best boss I ever had was a woman, and the worst boss I ever had was a woman, and it was the same person. And it was 2 different periods. The first 5 years was amazing, and then things changed in her life. in the economy. It's when the economy tanked in '09. And she did not have a very supportive boss. And it was very much a boys' club there. And so, your comment of, of being unsure of herself, that was a big part of it. So the person didn't change, the circumstances changed. And, with some perspective and time now, I have a very different view of her in that period. And I tend to think back on what did I do? Because, I did very, very well there, and I got cocky. I'll admit. And so, and I didn't try to, play to the boys club, because it was really obvious, and so it bothered me. But at the same time, it was out of my control. They stopped respecting her, and everyone knew it. And even though she was still the same intelligent, brilliant person she was a year earlier. And so it's a tough one, but sometimes circumstances will take over that you and your boss can't control, and it's you just gonna have to work through it.
So true. I hope she's on the webinar today, because I'm hoping that she'll remember that period of time and remember to use that as a learning experience.
She is not. No.
Okay. We do have some other questions in the chat window. This one is from Stacy Miller. And the question is, where can we find some of the self-assessment tools that you mentioned, particularly strength finders?
Absolutely. Stacy, so self-assessments, the 360 tools that organizations offer, I would contact your HR team, your lovely HR team, for both a 360 tool that leverages the high performance behaviors and leadership characteristics, as well as for Strength Finder. I would do it first following a conversation with your manager, because you want to make sure that that's the right intervention in terms of what you're trying to do. If it's in the name of development, or as part of the coaching journey that you've been on with your manager, they might recommend it. Always suggest to be in lockstep with your manager, and of course HR is a partner to you. Strength Finder, if you want to do something like that on your own, available offline on Google. It's typically a fee, but I've also seen it where for new team that are starting as part of the new leader assimilation or the team assimilation, it's something that the whole team does, so that you can understand the power that each individual member of the team brings and how you can better harness those strengths as together we win sort of mentality amongst the team going forward. So in both of those instances, I would say between the manager and the HR partner, they can support you in finding more information. On the last one, again, as I mentioned, the discovering your brand exercise is investment of time. It's a informal, and I would absolutely do that one informally. Just in the hallway. Hey, I know that you and I work together a lot. When you get a chance, not right now, but the next time I see you, would you mind just thinking about one or two adjectives that come to mind instantly, without even thinking, when you think about the way that I engage, and give them permission to be balanced in their feedback. So you're not looking for someone just to sing your praises. You want someone who can give you a balanced view, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So make sure that you make that known as you're seeking feedback. And I say, whether that's doing this simple brand exercise or just in general when you ask for feedback.
Great.
Stacey.
Thank you so much, Marissa. That's great. I did Strength Finders myself and loved it. And so I echo what Marissa said. And also, I'm going to be going out today. So be warned, if you're on this call and you know me, I may stop you today to ask you for some adjectives that describe me. Okay.
Don't forget to write your own list down first so you can compare the two.
Great. Good idea. Okay. Another question. I have another question here. It's from Katie, and I think it's a great one, Marissa. You talked a little bit about it earlier, but the question is, how should we respond to feedback that we get that we don't necessarily agree with?
First of all, it's important that you are an active listener throughout. I know for myself, I crave constructive feedback, and when I'm reading my performance review or I'm reading a 360 report, I'll look at the, positive strengths, and I'll just flip and I'll go straight to the section that has the areas to develop. It's really important to train yourself, and I'm training myself, to take it all in and to really listen. Make sure you understand where the feedback is coming from. So it's completely plausible for you to ask for some examples. You might not agree with it in the first instance of how it's put out there, but if you have more of this, I'm trying to discover and understand where you're coming from as a feedback provider, and ask questions that are not closed, but can give you a little bit more detail. Give me an example. Can you give me an example of a time when you've seen this from? And again, this is just me trying to understand it a little bit better. I think it makes for a more fruitful conversation. I would never suggest in the same conversation when you're receiving the feedback to jump out there and say, I disagree. And I know that might be hard to do, because you almost feel like you need to defend yourself. I would say take it in, show visual affirmation that you're following. And in that moment, you can say, I appreciate your feedback. I appreciate you taking the time. There's some things that resonate off the top, and there's some things that I just need to reflect on a little bit more. And I'd like to have the opportunity to come back and continue this conversation. Is that okay? And that gives you an opportunity. You put a pin in it for that moment, take a second, absorb it, process it, and come back and have more of a productive dialogue to discover, okay, you gave these examples. My view is this. Obviously there's a gap. So how do we bridge that? Because I'm interested in how we bridge the gap. I see it this way, you see it that way. How can we get both of those to come a little bit closer together?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, not only for that great answer, Marissa, but for the great question from Katie and other great questions. At this point, I don't have any more questions in the chat window. Jason, do you have any more that you see?
I don't see any more.
Great. Well, I certainly learned a lot today on this webinar about using our whole self to our advantage. And, being a woman and being in the med tech industry, I certainly can use this kind of encouragement. And so I hope everyone on the webinar today got a lot of value, and really appreciate your joining. Marissa, anything further that you wanted to share with the group?
I think there's a book called Resilience Factor out there I would recommend highly, and another one called Executive Presence by Sylvia Ann Hewlett. Resilience Factor really, because it gives you a lot of tips on how do you build up that inner strength that fortifies you in the time of uncertainty, challenge. Maybe you're having some disagreements at work. It helps to bolster that inner strength, that inner confidence to be able to make it through to the other side. The other book by Sylvia Ann Hewlett, Executive Presence, or EP, that one talks a lot about communications. It talks about appearance and this thing called gravitas. And while, you know, this presentation has been about how do you bring your whole self, there's an aspect of that is, you know, that's just uniquely who you are and being comfortable and confident with bringing that. But I think it's also important, the reason why I talk about feedback, and I am mentioning, you know, this other text, is because it's important to kind of handle who you are through these other filters. You know, gravitas is all about you know, having that content knowledge and knowing your stuff cold and being able to go 6 questions deep on a topic. If you are a subject matter expert, that's part of your flyness factor. So bring it, you know, and be so confident because you know your stuff. Don't walk in the meeting with 50,000 slides because you got it up here. You know, communication, and Sylvia Ann Hewlett's book, she talks about as being a powerful medium in terms of not only what you say, but your nonverbals and how you channel your energy. If you know you are someone who is just naturally an extrovert, and you're able to connect with people in your audience, work that to your advantage. And then the last section she talks about in terms of appearance, I think that goes back to the slide that I mentioned also. And how do you channel your flyness factor to just exert yourself and be more confident. And that's putting on a pair of heels, Jason, when you present at your next meeting.
That's great.
I'll be sure to do that.
All right. Thank you for having me, Jason and Allison, and I appreciate all the questions. That goes to Stacy, to Valerie, to Mary and her feedback, and Kaidi as well. I appreciate your engagement today.
Thank you very much.
Well, on behalf of our entire MedTech Women at SEMDA group, and also just SEMDA in general, I just want to say thank you so much, Marissa, for sharing all that with us today. I made a lot of notes myself today, and I collected particularly the 2 books that you mentioned. So perhaps, Jason, after the webinar is over today, we can send out a link that includes some of those things that Marissa talked about today.
Yeah, that'd be great. And what I can also do is I'll get this edited and post it onto YouTube. Then it'll go onto our website, and we can include links either in the YouTube comments or in the website. So, yep.
Perfect. All right, everyone. Well, thank you again so much for attending, and to see you at MedTech Women at SEMDA in Memphis next week. All right. Thanks, Marissa. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Marissa.